Good to see you all. Picture this. 2 tracks, 2 trains. One train led by China, the Chinese Communist Party, with Russia and Venezuela and Iran and maybe Brazil and North Korea in tow, that along this track they are trying to take the world over a cliff. That is where that track leads. And then picture with me another track. This is the US-led track, the track of liberty, of freedom, of free markets, free societies, of constitutional republics, of prosperity, of peace. And you have so much of the free world attached to this train that is heading towards prosperity and peace and freedom, democracy, things along these lines. Now consider this. South Korea, which had been on the US train, hitched together, tied together by blood, fire, and steel, is now in real danger of getting off of this track and getting onto this track, heading off the cliff of communist dictatorship and destruction of the society in terms of its systems, in terms of democracy, in terms of free markets, in terms of freedoms and rights that are so fundamental and basic to a constitutional republic. And there is a real danger that the South Korea car will be shifting tracks to be heading off of that cliff. The Chinese Communist Party is playing for keeps, and they are playing for world domination. While there are shooting wars in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine, there is a worldwide hybrid war where the Chinese Communist Party is trying to garner more power and influence around the world. The last thing that I was able to be involved in the first Trump administration was the determination for genocide and crimes against humanity by the Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang province against the Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities in that place. And what were they doing? They were flooding Xinjiang province with Han Chinese communist ethno-nationalists who were inserted and flooding Xinjiang, being put into the homes of the people there, flooding that place to take it over. Meanwhile, all sorts of birth control and abortive sorts of things were happening to decrease the population in Xinjiang so that there could be this Han Chinese communist ethno-nationalist takeover of Xinjiang while they were persecuting the people inside of Xinjiang province. If the US does not address this decoupling of Korea from one set of tracks to the other, we may face World War III. When Winston Churchill warned of the threats of the Nazi government in Germany, which was the National Socialist Party, I might add, he was denounced as a warmonger. He was denounced as somebody who was going to plunge Great Britain into war. And his warnings, for the most part, went unheeded. When Neville Chamberlain went to Germany to negotiate peace with Adolf Hitler while Hitler was arming for war, he came home to Great Britain as a hero, that he was the champion of peace. In fact, he said that he had won peace in our time. Now, In the retrospect of history, Churchill, who fought against the Nazi regime when they were waging a war against Europe and taking over Europe, and in the Battle of Britain, he was the hero who was rallying Britain to fight the forces of evil coming from Nazi Germany. Neville Chamberlain, who represented appeasement and a false peace, is now largely recognized as somebody who did not see his times clearly and failed miserably in bringing peace in the name of peace. Now, in South Korea, picture this situation happening because this is a real possibility, a real possibility. As South Korea is being transformed into a communist dictatorship with all that that entails, and as we've heard along these lines, if the Chinese Communist Party seeks to seize Taiwan by force, the Lee Jae-myung government in South Korea will not come to the aid of Taiwan. And the Korean War has not ended. The Korean War is still on, and North Korea can anytime come down across the 38th parallel and concurrently take over South Korea. Is that not World War III then? Russia-Ukraine is dragging on. The Middle East has been on fire. And if the Chinese Communist Party is waiting for the fall and turning of South Korea as the final domino before they make their move on Taiwan, folks, we are in World War III. Much better is an ounce of prevention than a pound of cure. Before the shooting starts in Taiwan, before the shooting starts on the Korean Peninsula, how much better would it be to address the crisis in South Korea, keep South Korea coupled with the US, and not going off the cliff with the Chinese Communist Party and the evil train that they are creating there? It would be much better to prevent that train wreck from happening than to watch it happen. South Korea, by many objective measures, is the best ally of the United States. I do not only speak of the love of the South Korean people for the United States. I do not only speak of the important military alliance memorialized in the Mutual Defense Treaty that has been in place for a long time. I do not only speak of the close business relationship and the economic ties and relation. I do not only speak of the cultural ties that are extensive, the educational ties that are extensive. I do not only speak of the systems that the US planted in South Korea that has enabled it to flourish and to be a beacon of light as contrasted with North Korea. I'm also talking about the 5th largest military in the world, in South Korea, facing off with the 4th largest military in the world, which is North Korea, and not only that, the involvement of the 3 largest militaries in the world, namely the US, China, and Russia. The US needs South Korea to be a bulwark to prevent World War III. Who fought alongside Americans, not only, of course, in the Korean War, but in the Vietnam War, but also in Iraq, also in Afghanistan? You think it was the Canadians? Canada is sitting there saying, and taking as an insult that, we're not the 51st US state. I've heard South Koreans who say, please, rather than becoming a communist dictatorship, we'd rather be the 51st US state. I've heard that from a bunch of Koreans. If this linchpin ally is allowed to fall, it is like pulling the pin of the grenade of the most important region right now, geopolitically and strategically for the United States of America, and you will see an explosion that will rock the world. Would that our leadership would increasingly see that before we are plunged into World War III. There was a memorial service for the Christian martyr and American hero Charlie Kirk recently. Millions of people all around the world and across the United States have watched this. Charlie Kirk was going to brief Secretary of State Marco Rubio about the unfolding crisis in South Korea, the last place he went outside the United States before he was gunned down. If he had a chance to share with Secretary Rubio, I believe he would have said a lot of the things that have been shared on this panel. He would have informed Secretary Rubio of the religious persecution against Christian churches that are being raided and pastors that are being jailed. He would have shared about the collapsing constitutional republic of Korea. He would have shared the rise of this communist dictatorship in South Korea. And now the young people in South Korea are saying, we are Charlie Kirk. They're elevating their voices. They are seeking to wake up the country and the world to what is happening on the front line of democracy and freedom in the world, which runs through South Korea. Eminent voices in the United States are increasingly joining their voices together to wake up America and American leadership as to what is going on. This is not the time for a false complacence. This is not a time to stay neutral. This is not a time to hold back. Do you want stability? Do you want peace? Then now is the time to intervene in regards to South Korea. Let me give some particulars here. Lee Jae-myung came to put on a show with President Trump. He was completely false, he was completely fake, and he is not to be trusted. The man is marinated in lies. So when there was this agreement for South Korea to invest $350 billion in the United States of America, he never came with the intention of actually fulfilling that. And indeed, as expected, he went back to Korea and said, oh, this would throw South Korea into a financial crisis, the likes of the IMF era of South Korea, so we cannot afford to give that money and to invest that money in the United States. Oh, very conveniently using the Hyundai, the LG Energy Solution raid in Georgia as also a further pretext to stoke anti-American sentiment in South Korea, stabbing President Trump in the back right after putting on the show as if he was going to do all these things for America. That's the cold reality of what is going on. But also, consider this. He could come up with 250 million of that 350 million if he merely decided to divert 3 places of funding. 100 billion going to leftist organizations inside of South Korea. Why should that go there? Over 100 billion going to offshore wind power and solar power equipment going to the Chinese Communist Party. And finally, over 50 billion in cash reserves that Korea has. He can do 250 billion just by diverting money from those three sources. But instead, he is actively decoupling South Korea from the US train to the Chinese Communist Party train, and the country is going off of a cliff. The sooner that is recognized, the sooner that is realized, the sooner that the righteous might of the United States of America can intervene for its most precious ally in the world, South Korea, the better. The US is not helpless. Indeed, the FBI was involved in the huge drug bust in South Korea. It's the US Navy that is blowing up drug boats emerging out of Venezuela. Maduro probably feels a good bit of stress right now. Just as Kim Jong-un of North Korea was terrified to see the US bunker busters going into the Iranian bunkers to destroy the nuclear program of Iran. Kim Jong-un has nowhere underground he can hide anymore, and he saw it graphically. Do not wait for the communization of South Korea to become full-fledged, and for the unification of Korea to be a communist unification under the Chinese Communist Party and North Korea. Do not wait until that day. Then, the US security posture and geopolitical and strategic interests will be severely compromised, and the US will have a much harder fight on its hands to lead and to save the free world. I believe the US leadership and the US people are starting to wake up and starting to understand more of these things. And as Charlie Kirk said in his last message abroad in South Korea, that if he knows the United States, that he will see the righteous might of the United States employed to build up and to save South Korea in this time of crisis, in this time of great danger. It is time. And as the Korean patriots are gasping for air, as they are being choked and poisoned and destroyed, it is time for the US not only to intervene against the present regime, but also to protect the patriots and the American-loving people of South Korea and its noble leadership, including those who are represented here on this panel. We need a whitelist of at least 1,200 of the leaders of South Korea who Lee Jae-myung has vowed to root out falsely as insurrectionists when he is the insurrectionist. And we also need sanctions. Why not sanctions like in Brazil, where Brazilian Supreme Court justices were sanctioned in the midst of the persecution of President Bolsonaro, in the midst of election fraud in Brazil? I believe President Trump knows what it is to be hounded through lawfare, to be persecuted politically, to be attempted to be assassinated even. And if the US knows what is happening to the rightful President Yoon, how is it any different from the sorts of things that have been happening to people like Bolsonaro and President Trump himself? visa sanctions, economic sanctions relating to a coup d'etat. These are all among some of the initial tools that can be used with respect to the Korean situation. Note, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Korea is being attacked and pressured as we speak to keep Lee Jae-myung from being prosecuted. If one of those criminal cases against Lee Jae-myung is able to go through and you have an honest, upright court and judge who's able to uphold that, that could be the end of the Lee Jae-myung administration. These judges need to be protected so that a free, independent judiciary in South Korea can be allowed to protect the country from this destruction. Korea is a reflection and the image of the goodness and greatness of the United States of America. Are we going to let them fall? Are we going to sit on the sidelines in this time of crisis and great need? I've seen it firsthand. I've been there multiple times this year. I've seen the record crowds at the Incheon airport, the record crowd in front of the leading university in South Korea. I've heard their voices. And I implore the United States people and the United States leadership to hear the voices of our closest ally in South Korea. If you won't do it for doing what is right and upholding human rights and freedom and democracy, which I believe our country still believes in, do it at least for American interests and U.S. geopolitical strategic interests, because those are in grave risk as well. Thank you for your attention.